With us to discuss the inflationary increases and how they will impact Canadians is Mr. Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Now, inflation is at a 30-year high, Mr. Terrazzano. We mentioned some stats off in the intro, but really bring this home to our Canadian viewers. How will this directly impact the cost of living for Canadian taxpayers?
Well, we're seeing inflation that is at a 3 decades high. So this rising cost of living is really becoming one of the key economic issues facing Canadians' day-to-day lives. And what is so unfortunate is that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the federal government could immediately make life a little more affordable by providing tax relief. But we're seeing Ottawa do the exact opposite, making the tough times tougher with higher taxes during the middle of a pandemic.
Now, the three main factors here seem to be the housing issue, gasoline, and groceries. So why are prices rising quickly for these three items in particular, sir?
Well, I think let's start by focusing on gasoline, just because it impacts so much of everybody's day-to-day life. And we have to remember that taxes can make up between 31 and 42% of the pump price, depending on the province. And we also have to remember that the carbon tax has already increased twice during the pandemic. It's getting set to increase again to 11 cents per liter in April. But the Trudeau government isn't stopping there. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says that he wants to raise his carbon tax to nearly 40 cents per liter by 2030.
Some very troubling news for Canadian wallets there, sir. Now, are some parts of the country experiencing worse inflation than other areas?
Yeah, there are some provinces that are getting hit a little bit harder. You have Prince Edward Island that is seeing rising inflation. You also have Ontario and Manitoba. For those latter two provinces, Ontario, Manitoba, you see higher electricity prices that are really driving those increases. But of course, in many provinces and some big cities, you're also seeing some sky-high housing costs, which are really impacting some would-be first-time home buyers.
And why is this the case, Mr. Terrazzano? Why are some regions and cities more affected than others?
Well, it's tough to really go into specific regions. Of course, we mentioned Ontario, Manitoba, you're seeing higher electricity prices. But one thing that impacts all Canadians from coast to coast is the printing press. During the pandemic, we've seen the Bank of Canada print $370 billion. And the more dollars that the Bank of Canada creates out of thin air, the less that your dollars in your bank accounts, in your retirement savings will buy. And one of the key issues that we have is that the Bank of Canada is printing new dollars out of thin air, but of course it can't print up new homes or new farmland out of thin air.
All right, sir, just over a minute left here, but let's talk solutions. What are some meaningful measures that the federal government can actually take to address this rising inflation?
I'll give you three. Number one, we just talked about it. Stop printing so much money. Number two, we have to see the federal government rein in the massive amount of government borrowing and the unprecedented amount of government spending. And number three, give us a much needed tax relief. The first rule of government during these type of tough times is to do no harm. But like I said, we're seeing the federal government make these tough times tougher with higher taxes.
It's interesting how Canada compares to other countries. I know in a recent press release you mentioned that governments worldwide are actually cutting taxes. So what sorts of taxes are they cutting?
Yeah, well, we've seen South Korea reduce gas taxes by 20%. India also reducing taxes. You have Spain, France reducing electricity taxes. UK, Italy, Poland, Sri Lanka also reducing taxes. Even south of the border, you have 11 American states cutting income or business taxes. So other countries are providing their citizens with relief, but Ottawa is giving us higher tax bills.
All right, Mr. Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Always great having you on Forum Daily, sir. Thanks again for your time today.
Thanks for having me on.